Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another Reddit Stories video. Today we are covering some of the most disturbing search and rescue stories ever posted on Reddit. And I don't just mean scary in the jump scare kind of way. I mean the kind of stories that make you rethink every hiking trip you've ever planned. The kind of stories that come from real people, search and rescue workers and lost hikers alike, who went into the wilderness and came back with something they cannot explain. Some of these stories come from the people doing the searching, the SAR officers and volunteers who have spent years out in the backcountry looking for missing hikers and who have seen things on those searches that their training never prepared them for. And some of these stories come from the hikers themselves, the people who got lost or got turned around, or found something out there in the dark that made them wish they had never left the trailhead. These are great to listen to while you're studying, working, falling asleep, or just want something that gets under your skin for a while. So make sure you stick around, because every single story in this one is worth it. Also, please hit that like button before you forget. It really does help out more than you know. And please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Alright, let's get into it. These are disturbing search and rescue stories from the wilderness. 31 years. That's how long I did this work. I started when I was 22 years old. A kid who loved the outdoors and wanted to do something that mattered. I finished at 53, a person who knew things about the wilderness that I wouldn't wish on anyone. My last official search before retirement was in late October in a remote section of the North Cascades. Missing subject was a solo backpacker, male, mid-20s, graduate student doing ecological research. Overdue by 2 days when his university contact called it in. We found his camp on day 2, tent still standing, gear inside, food properly hung. His research equipment was set up on a folding table outside the tent, notes spread out, pen lying across the notebook as though he had stepped away mid-sentence. His dog was tied to a tree near the tent, calm, well cared for. He had left the dog tied at camp and gone somewhere without it. You don't do that in the North Cascades in late October unless you expect to be back very soon. The dogs picked up his scent going northeast into terrain that got rough fast. We followed for 3 hours up a steep rocky slope, across exposed ridgeline, then down into a valley I had never worked in despite 31 years in these mountains. A strange valley, narrow, heavily forested, with a small lake at the bottom that wasn't on any of the maps we were carrying. Not a seasonal pool, a real lake, maybe 200 yards across, dark water, cold, perfectly still. A lake of meaningful size, simply not on any map. We found him at the edge of the lake, alive, sitting on a flat rock at the water's edge looking out across the water. His back was to us as we came down the slope, and he didn't turn when we called his name. When we reached him and came around to face him, he looked up at us slowly, physically fine, but carrying that particular blank calm I had seen before in my career and come to understand as something more fundamental than ordinary shock. He said he had heard something from his camp, a sound from the direction of the ridge unlike anything he had heard before, and he had followed it because that was the kind of person he was, a researcher, someone who moves toward the unknown rather than away from it. He said when he reached the lake the sound had stopped and something had been waiting. He said it didn't have a form exactly, that it was more a presence in and of the lake itself, that it had communicated with him, but not in language, in something more direct than language. He said he had understood things sitting at that water's edge that he could not now put into words, like the knowledge had been given to him in a format his mind could receive, but his mouth couldn't reproduce. He said one thing he could put into words. Whatever was in that lake had told him it was tired, that it had been here for a very long time, and was tired in the way that only very old things can be tired, and that it had called him here because it wanted someone to know that. Someone living. Someone who would carry the knowledge of its exhaustion back out into the world. I put in my retirement papers 2 weeks after that search. I hiked in those mountains one last time on a clear November morning 3 days after I retired. Just me, no team, no radio, no purpose, just walking. The mountains were quiet the way they are when they're not performing wilderness for anyone, just being what they are, And I walked through them knowing what I now knew about what they contained, and I felt, for the first time in 31 years of searching, something I can only describe as being known in return. I went home at dusk. I poured a drink and sat on the porch, and I didn't tell my family anything about that final search or that final walk. Some things you carry alone, not because they're too heavy, but because they belong to you and the wilderness and nothing else. I want to be clear about something before I start. I am not a superstitious person. I spent 17 years as a search and rescue coordinator for a county in rural Montana. Before that, I did 8 years as a wilderness EMT. 25 years total, working in backcountry emergency response. I have seen a lot of death. I have seen a lot of trauma. I have held the line professionally through things that would break most people, and I did it without flinching because that was the job, and I believed in the job completely. I retired 2 years ago, 14 months earlier than I had planned. The case I'm about to describe is the reason why. It came in on a Thursday evening in late July. A family of 5, 2 parents and 3 kids, ranging from 8 to 14, had gone on a day hike in a remote section of the Bob Marshall Wilderness. They had filed a permit, left a detailed itinerary with the ranger station, all the right things. When they didn't return to their vehicle by 7 that evening, the ranger station called it in to us. We deployed 4 teams at first light the following morning. The Bob Marshall is serious country, over 1 million acres of roadless wilderness, but the family had filed a detailed route and we were confident we could locate them quickly. Team 1 found the family's campsite by mid-morning. It was off their filed route by about 2 miles, which was our first flag. The site had been set up properly, tents pitched, food hung correctly, gear organized, but the family was not there, and the fire pit had burned down to cold ash, which suggested nobody had been at the site since at least the previous evening. Team 2 picked up tracks leading northeast from the campsite into terrain that was not on the family's filed route at all. Rough country, dense forest transitioning into rocky slopes with significant elevation gain. Not the kind of terrain a family with 3 kids would choose voluntarily. By afternoon, all 4 teams were converged on a search grid to the northeast of the campsite. The tracks had become harder to follow on the rocky ground, but the dogs were working well. Then around 3 in the afternoon, something happened that I have never been able to explain in 2 years of trying. All 4 teams, operating in different sections of the grid at least a mile apart from each other, reported the same thing at almost exactly the same time. Each team reported that their dogs had stopped working, not slowed down, not become confused, stopped completely, sat down and refused to move in any direction. 4 separate dog teams, 4 separate handlers, same behavior, same moment. I was at base ops coordinating radio traffic when all 4 calls came in within a span of about 4 minutes. I remember sitting there with the radio in my hand and feeling something I had not felt in 17 years of this work. I felt genuinely afraid, not of anything I could name, just afraid. We pulled the dog teams and went to grid searching on foot. 2 hours later, Team 3 found the family. They were together, all 5 of them, seated in a rough circle on a flat section of rock near the top of a ridge. Physically unharmed, no injuries, no signs of exposure, no dehydration. The 2 youngest children were asleep sitting upright, which was strange but not alarming on its own given the circumstances. What was alarming was the parents. Both of them were awake, and both of them were looking directly at the Team 3 lead as she approached, not looking around, not scanning the area, not reacting to the sound of the team coming up the slope, just looking directly at her from the moment she came over the ridge as though they had known exactly where she would appear and had been waiting for it. The team lead asked if everyone was okay. The father said yes. She asked what had happened, how they had ended up so far off their route. The mother answered that one. She said they had followed someone. Team lead asked who. The mother said she didn't know his name. She said he had come to their campsite the previous evening and told them he wanted to show them something. She said they had followed him through the night to this ridge. Team lead asked where this person was now. The father looked around the ridge slowly, scanning the tree line below, and said he had gone back into the trees when he heard the team coming up the slope. We searched that ridge and the tree line below it. No person, no tracks on the rocky ground, no evidence of another human being anywhere in that area. On the helicopter ride out, the 14-year-old, the oldest kid, said something quietly to the EMT sitting beside her. The EMT told me about it later, off the record. The girl said the man who led them had been very tall and very thin, and that he had not spoken out loud. That she had heard him in her head. She said he had shown them something at the top of the ridge, but she couldn't remember what it was. She said when she tried to remember, it was just white. She said one more thing. She said he had told her that he brought people up there sometimes, that he liked to show them the view, and that usually he let them go home. Usually? I filed my retirement paperwork the following month. I told my wife it was time. She knew there was more to it than that, but she didn't push. She has always been good that way. I still think about that word, usually. I think about it most nights before I fall asleep. About all the cases over 17 years that we never resolved. All the people we never found. And whether some of them had made it to that ridge, and whether whatever was up there had simply decided, that day, not to let them go home. I want to preface this by saying that I have spoken to 2 other members of my team about whether to share this, and both of them told me to do whatever I needed to do. We've all been carrying it for a while. Maybe putting it out there helps, maybe it doesn't, but here we are. The missing person in this case was a man I'll call Garrett. 38 years old, experienced backcountry traveler, had done solo trips in the Cascade Range more times than most people do in a lifetime. He went in on a Tuesday in early September with a 10-day permit and a well-documented route. When he didn't come out on day 10, his emergency contact called the ranger station. We deployed on day 11. Standard initial search, covered his filed route, found his first 2 campsites exactly where he said they'd be in his itinerary. Both sites had been broken down properly. He had moved on from each one. The 3rd campsite on his route we never found. The trail simply stopped yielding evidence of him somewhere around day 4 of his planned trip. We searched for 6 days, covered enormous ground, found nothing. Weather was closing in, and after 6 days, with no sign, we scaled back to periodic sweeps. The family was notified that the search was ongoing, but that prospects were diminishing. On day 22, after he first went missing, one of our periodic sweep teams found him walking out on a trail section we had covered multiple times, walking calmly, pack on his back, trekking poles in hand, like a man finishing a pleasant hike. The team led on that sweep later told me that her first thought when she saw him coming down the trail was that he looked completely fine, better than fine. She said he looked rested, healthy, like a man who had been on a good vacation rather than lost in the wilderness for 3 weeks. Physically, he was in remarkable shape. No significant weight loss despite 3 weeks in the field beyond his planned provisions. No signs of exposure. No injuries. No dehydration. The medical team who assessed him were openly puzzled. One of them told me quietly that by any physiological measure, the man had not been through a 3-week survival situation. His body showed maybe 2 or 3 days of mild exertion. He remembered leaving his 2nd campsite. After that, his memory was vague. He described fragments. He said he remembered light, a lot of light, more than made sense for the forested terrain he was in. He remembered warmth. He remembered a feeling of complete stillness, not frightening, just total and absolute quiet. He said it felt like being held, though he struggled to explain what he meant by that. He did not remember 3 weeks passing. As far as his subjective experience was concerned, he said it felt like perhaps a day, maybe less. There were 2 things that were different about Garrett that I noticed during the debrief and that I have not been able to stop thinking about since. The first was his eyes. I had met Garrett once before this incident, briefly, at a permit office. I remembered his eyes as being brown. In the debrief, they were gray. Not a different shade of brown. Not hazel. Gray. His wife, who was present at the debrief, noticed it too. She didn't say anything in the room, but she found me afterward and asked me quietly if I had seen it. I said I had. She said she didn't know what to do with it. I said I didn't either. The second thing was something he said at the very end of the debrief when I asked him if there was anything else he wanted to tell us. He thought about it for a long time. Then he said that wherever he had been, whatever had happened during those 3 weeks, something had wanted him to carry a message back. I asked what the message was. He said he wasn't sure he could put it into words. He said it was more of a feeling than a statement. He said the closest he could get was this. He said it wanted us to know that it was paying attention, that it had always been paying attention, and that the wilderness was not empty the way we thought it was, that it was full, completely full, of something that watched and waited and occasionally reached out to touch a life passing through, and that usually, when it did, it gave life back. Usually, that word again. The second time in my career I have heard that word used in exactly that context. Garrett moved to a different state about 8 months after this. He and his wife. Fresh start, he said. I got a card from him at Christmas last year. He seemed well. He didn't mention any of it. But at the bottom of the card, underneath his signature, he had written 4 words that I've looked at many times since. The gray is permanent. I haven't written back yet. I'm still figuring out what to say. 312 call-outs over 14 years. I've kept count because it matters to me. Each one of those 312 represents a person who needed help in the wilderness, and our team responded. I'm proud of that number. I'm proud of every single one. There is one call-out, number 289 if I'm being precise, that I did not complete. I went in, I encountered something I cannot explain, and I came back out and told my team lead I was done for that night, and I sat in my vehicle until the search concluded. In 14 years, it is the only time I have ever done that. I am not a person who quits. I want that to be understood before I tell you what happened. The search was in a coastal range in Oregon. Wet, dense, old-growth forest with heavy canopy and almost no light penetration even on a clear night. The missing subject was a woman in her 30s, solo hiker, reported overdue by her husband when she didn't return from a day hike by dark. Straightforward call-out on paper. My team was working the eastern grid, pushing through some particularly dense undergrowth about 6 miles in. 2 of us together, myself and a partner I had worked with for years. Standard 2-person unit. We had been in the grid for about 3 hours when I started to feel wrong. Not physically wrong, mentally wrong. The best way I can describe it is a feeling of being unwelcome. Not afraid exactly, not of anything I could point to. Just a deep and growing certainty that I was somewhere I was not supposed to be and that something was aware of my presence and was not pleased about it. I've been in the wilderness at night hundreds of times. I don't spook easily. I know the difference between nerves and something genuine. I told myself it was nerves and kept working the grid. 20 minutes later, my partner stopped. She put her hand out to stop me too. She pointed her headlamp at a tree about 15 feet ahead of us. Carved into the bark of that tree, at roughly chest height, was a face. Not a face that had occurred naturally in the grain of the wood. A deliberately carved face. Deep-cut lines, hollow eyes, a mouth open wide. Well executed. Not fresh. The cuts were old and weathered, but not ancient either. Maybe years old. It was facing directly into the grid we were working, as though whoever had carved it had placed it there specifically to watch that section of forest. We marked the GPS position and kept going. SAR workers find strange things in the backcountry. It's not unheard of, but over the next 30 minutes, we found 4 more. All carved into separate trees, all facing inward into the same section of forest, all with that same open mouth. And as we moved deeper into the grid, the carvings became fresher. The most recent one, the 5th one, had cuts so clean and pale against the dark bark that they could not have been more than days old. Someone had been carving these faces in this section of forest recently, and whoever had done it had covered a very specific area, as though marking a boundary, or marking what was inside one. That was when I heard it, from somewhere in the dark ahead of us, from inside the area bounded by the carved trees. There was a sound, a low, repetitive sound. Not an animal I recognized. Not the wind. It had an intentionality to it, a pattern that put it somewhere in the range of deliberate sound, almost vocal but not human, repeated every few seconds with perfect regularity. I stood there and I listened to it for about 30 seconds, and in those 30 seconds, something happened that I cannot explain clinically. I became certain, with a completeness I have never felt about anything before or since, that I needed to leave that area immediately. Not because I was scared, not because of any threat I could identify, but because something in whatever was making that sound communicated to me in a way that bypassed rational thought entirely, that my presence there was a mistake, and that continuing into that area would be a mistake I would not be able to take back. I told my partner we were pulling back. She didn't argue. Her face told me she had felt it too. We reported the carvings to team lead, gave the GPS coordinates, and requested another team take over our grid. I went to my vehicle and I sat there. My partner sat with me. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The missing woman was found by another team at the northern edge of the search area, well outside our grid, about 2 hours later. She was disoriented but physically okay. Nobody went back into that grid that night. Team lead made that call quietly and without a lot of explanation. I've thought about those carvings a lot over the 2 years since, about who put them there and why, about what they were marking and whether it was meant to keep something in or keep other things out, about the sound inside the boundary they made, about the certainty I felt standing there in a way that overrode 14 years of professional training and 300 call-outs of experience. I don't refuse call-outs. That's not who I am. Number 289 is the only exception in my career, and I expect it will remain the only one. Some sections of forest, I think, you earn the right to be in, and some you don't, and the wilderness, old as it is, knows the difference. Most people who tell SR stories tell them from the rescuer's side. I'm telling this one from the other side. I was the one who got lost. I was the one they were looking for. And what I experienced during the 18 hours I spent alone in the wilderness before they found me is something I've kept to myself for 4 years. I'm ready to put it somewhere now. I was backpacking in the Wind River Range in Wyoming, solo, 5-day trip, route filed with the ranger station, all the right boxes checked. The Wind Rivers are serious backcountry, high elevation, exposed terrain, weather that can change faster than you can respond to it. I had been there twice before, and I had a high comfort level with the area. On day 3, a late afternoon storm came in, harder than the forecast had indicated. I made the decision to push toward a lower campsite I had used on a previous trip rather than shelter in place on the exposed ridge I was crossing. That decision, made in deteriorating visibility and rising wind, is where things went wrong. I got off route in the storm, and by the time it cleared enough to see I was on a slope I didn't recognize with the light nearly gone. I set up my tent, ate something, and assessed. I had everything I needed to survive comfortably for several more days. My spot tracker had already sent my emergency beacon the moment I diverted from my filed route. I knew someone would come looking. I told myself to stay calm, stay put, and wait for morning. What I'm about to describe happened in the hours between about 2 and 4 in the morning. I woke up suddenly and completely the way you sometimes do in the backcountry when some part of your brain that stays on guard while you sleep decides something is wrong. I lay still and listened. The storm had fully cleared and the night was very quiet. Clear sky, almost full moon. Enough light coming through the tent fabric that I could see my hands in front of my face. Then I heard the voice, not close, maybe 200 or 300 yards away down the slope below my tent. A human voice, male, calling out. Not words I could make out clearly, just the sound of someone calling, like someone searching. My first thought was that the SAR team had deployed through the night and found my area faster than I expected. I unzipped my tent and stood up and called back. I used my whistle 3 times, the universal signal. I shone my headlamp down the slope. The calling stopped the moment I whistled. No response to my light, just silence. I waited 10 minutes and called again. Nothing. I told myself it could have been sound carrying strangely across the terrain. In high elevation, wilderness at night sound does strange things. I went back into my tent. 20 minutes later, the calling started again. Closer this time. Same quality of voice. Male, indistinct words, rising and falling like someone searching and occasionally calling out a name. I came back out of the tent and signaled again. This time I had a clear view down the moonlit slope for several hundred yards. Nothing. No person. No light. No movement. This happened 4 more times over the next 2 hours. Each time, the voice would get slightly closer and then stop the moment I responded. Each time I could see nothing on the slope. The last time, right around 4 in the morning, The voice was close enough that it was clearly within 100 yards of my tent, and this time when it stopped in response to my whistle, it did not simply go silent. It changed. The calling stopped, and in its place was a sound I cannot describe accurately. The closest thing I can compare it to is the sound of something very large moving through dense brush, except the slope below me had no dense brush. It was open, rocky terrain, and the sound moved from right to left across the slope, steadily, for maybe 30 seconds, and then it was gone. The SAR team reached me at about noon the following day. I asked the team leader if any units had been deployed in my area overnight. He said no. He said they had staged at the trailhead and waited for daylight to deploy given the terrain and post-storm conditions. There had been nobody in my area before their team arrived that morning. I told him I had heard what I thought was a searcher during the night. He gave me the careful, neutral expression that I now recognize, having talked to a few SR people since then, as the expression they use when someone describes something they've heard before and don't have a good answer for. He wrote something in his notebook. He asked me if I was feeling okay. I said yes. He said good and moved on. I've done a lot of reading since then about experiences people report when lost alone in wilderness. There is a documented phenomenon, well documented enough to have its own name in SAR circles, where lost subjects report hearing voices calling their name, sometimes explained as auditory hallucination brought on by stress and sleep deprivation, sometimes less neatly explained than that. What I can't fit into the hallucination explanation is the sound at the end. The moving sound across open rocky slope, the sound of something going from right to left in the dark, because I was not asleep when I heard that. I was standing outside my tent in the moonlight, fully awake, and I heard it clearly, and it raised every hair on my body. I've been back to the Wind Rivers since. I'll keep going back. I love that range, and I'm not going to let one bad night take it from me. But I sleep lighter now on solo trips than I used to. And I have never once left my tent in the dark since that night, no matter what I think I hear outside. Some things in the wilderness call out to you, and some of those things, I think, you are better off not answering. Eight years on a SAR team in the Ozarks. The missing subject was a woman in her late 60s. She had been visiting her adult daughter near a large wilderness area and had gone for a morning walk on a local trail she knew well. When she wasn't back by noon, her daughter called it in. We had her scent trail quickly, and the dogs followed it onto the main trail, and then, about a mile in, off the trail, and into the woods. This was our first flag. A 68-year-old woman on a familiar trail with no history of going off route. The dogs followed the scent off trail without hesitation, which meant she had genuinely walked that way deliberately. The scent trail led us in a wide, slow curve through the forest. Not a straight line, not the disoriented looping pattern you sometimes see with confused subjects. A deliberate, gradual curve. Like someone following a path that only they could see. The curve took us through increasingly dense forest into a section of the Ozarks that I knew but didn't love. Older forest, darker, the kind of terrain where the light gets thin even in full afternoon. Every quarter mile or so, we found something hanging from a tree branch above the scent trail. A thread caught on a branch, then a small piece of cloth, then something deliberately tied. By the fourth one, I stopped the team and looked carefully. They were markers, handmade, deliberately placed at consistent intervals. Small bundles of leaves and twigs tied with strips of fabric that matched the description of the shirt she had been wearing when she left. She had torn pieces from her own clothing to make them. She was leaving a trail. The team lead said it was a good sign, that she was thinking clearly and trying to help us find her. But something bothered me, and it took me a while to identify what. The markers were not pointing back toward the main trail. They were oriented outward, away from her direction of travel, pointing into the forest on either side of her path, not marking the way she had gone, marking what was on either side of the path as she walked it, like she was documenting what she was passing, not where she was going. We found her at dusk, 3 miles off the main trail, sitting in a dry creek bed, physically fine, calm, and coherent. When I asked her about the markers, she said she had made them so we would know where they were standing. I asked who. She said she didn't have a name for them. She said they had been walking alongside her from the moment she left the main trail. One on each side, staying in the trees, keeping pace with her. She couldn't see them clearly, but she could feel them and occasionally hear them. They had not threatened her in any way. They had simply walked with her. I asked her why she had kept walking instead of stopping. She said it hadn't occurred to her to stop. She said it felt like she was being taken somewhere and she had trusted it. She said when she reached the creek bed, the feeling had stopped. The presences on either side had simply been gone, and she had sat down and waited. She said she had known we would come. I asked her if she could describe what she had heard from them in the trees. She thought about it and said it wasn't a sound exactly, more like the idea of breathing. She said the closest she could describe it was like walking next to two very large, very old, very patient things that had been in these woods for so long that they had become part of the silence itself. Before she got in the car to go to the hospital, she turned and looked back at the tree line for a moment. Then she smiled at me and said they had gone back in. She could feel when they were near, and she couldn't feel them anymore. She said it in the same tone she might have used to say the rain had stopped. I drove home that night through the Ozark Hills and thought about two very large, very old, very patient things that had become part of the silence itself. And I thought about how many times I had walked in that forest and felt the silence and never once considered what might be in it. I consider it every time now.